I call this drill wall breathing. So the goal here is going to be to teach how do we have a neutral position of the hips or the pelvis, end of the rib cage while we breathe. So I'm going to show the drill and then I'll break down a couple things. So I'm going to come here and do a partial wall sit. What that means is my feet are about 18 inches away from the wall. I'm going to sit my back of my hips, my belt line against the wall. So the sacrum is against the wall. And so that means my hips are an oval pointing straight up and down. I'm going to get my shoulders and head against the wall without pushing them back. There should maybe be a little space between your low back and the wall. From here, I'm just going to breathe in. I'm going to take an inhale, and then I'm going to exhale and let the ribs drop down. I'm going to inhale again and exhale like I'm lightly blowing through a straw to let the ribs drop. When I inhale, I want to make sure that the ribs don't flare up here. So I want to make sure that as I inhale, my back doesn't get further from the wall, because that's going to be a rib flare or a pelvic tilt. So I'm going to breathe in and exhale. What we're doing with the legs is just having some weight into the heels and a little bit the ball of the foot, so I have a stable foot. I'm gently pushing into the wall, loading the quadriceps just a little bit. Inhale, exhale. As I exhale all the way, I'm trying to get the rib cage to drop, but why have my head and shoulders against the wall is I don't want to slump forward. So we're trying to teach how can I depress or bring down the bottom of the rib cage, find a strategy to breathe without flaring it back up, and do all of that without slouching. And then I should be able to kind of move my arms around, because I want this to be a position I can move from, not a rigid posture. So why are we doing all this in the first place? Well, often I find my clients get really confused with positions about pelvic tilting. I often did in physical therapy school, and it's typically not language that I prefer to use, because pelvic tilting doesn't tell us the whole story. The pelvis is these bones here that make a ring. They connect to the lumbar spine or the lower back. Then the rib cage comes from the top and connects to the top of the lower back as well, also as an oval. So we have these two rings or ovals that are at the bottom and the top of our lumbar spine or our lower back. And so often when there's language about pelvic tilting, it's usually the reason why we're using that language is to say something about where the lower back is in space, or what the torso and abdominal and core muscles might be doing. But if I only focus on what my pelvis is doing, it's dragging the low back along with it, and that may or may not be the right position depending on what position my rib cage is in. So what I mean by that is if I have a flared forward rib cage, meaning the tips of my ribs, these bones in the front, are flared and pointing more outward like that, that arches my lower back. And then the pelvic tilt is going to mean a totally different thing than if I bring my rib cage down and then pelvic tilt from there. And so the reason why we need to care about our rib cage position is because the rib cage affects the lumbar spine from the top, and the pelvis affects the lumbar spine from the bottom. However, the main reason why I don't use this language once we get these concepts down is because we don't initiate movements with pelvic tilts. I don't go to reach for something and just pelvic tilt. I don't do kind of pelvic tilt underneath as another movement. I initiate movements with my arms or my legs. And our torso muscles should hold a relatively neutral position. Relatively meaning here in the middle. And so if I just pelvic tilt, I'm not in a neutral position, that's going to throw things off. If I just flare my ribs or just compress my ribs, again, that's not initiating movement. So I want to find positions where the pelvis, that oval, is matching the rib cage, that oval, and then I initiate movements maintaining these alignments. So back to the wall here, we're looking for just a comfortable position of your pelvis and your lower back. And then we're going to come to the wall and see if we can get the rib cage to match that. Most people are going to have a flared forward rib cage. And I found if I teach it to them off the wall, they end up coming here and kind of slumping. And then they're like, hey, I'm not standing up straight. I'm like, no, you're not. So the goal here isn't to get to this position. I want to maintain my full height, but see if I can bring the rib cage down without coming there. And for a lot of people, that's hard to feel at first. And so when I come to the wall, I have some real contact points, head on the wall, shoulders on the wall, hips on the wall, and then I can come down and do that. So I just want to feel that and do that for a couple minutes throughout the day, and then see if you can recreate some of those positions when you're just standing. When you're walking, can you find that ribcage position again without slumping down? So I tend to want to get my clients away from this aggressive pelvic tilting and more towards, hey, what's my alignment like? And often the alignment is going to be better, or a missing piece of that alignment is what's happening with the rib cage, and we can adjust our rib cage position with breathing. So give that a shot. Let me know how it goes.